The morning of the auction, Margaret Holloway sat in the parking lot of the Mercer County Municipal Building and did not go inside. Not yet. The engine was off, the heat already fading from the vents, and the cold pressed itself against the windows the way cold does in Pennsylvania in late October. Not dramatically, not with wind or spectacle, just a slow and patient erasure of warmth. She had arrived 40 minutes early, which was not a habit she had developed late in life. It was the only habit she had never lost. On the passenger seat, a single piece of paper. The auction listing printed from the county website at the public library 2 days ago because the internet at the church office where she kept a small room had been unreliable since September, and no one had fixed it, and she had not asked again after the second time. The listing was brief. Lot 47, unregistered underground residential structure. Mercer County outskirts. Condition unknown. No verified access on record. No utility connections confirmed. Starting bid $5. She had circled those last two words in pencil, not with excitement, not with doubt, but the way a person marks something they want to remember seeing for the first time. The bag on the back seat was not large. It had been a gift from Walter for their 35th anniversary. Dark green with brass clasps, the kind of luggage built to last, and had. Inside 3 changes of clothes, her husband's watch in a cloth pouch, a folder of documents she had been carrying with her for 14 months, and a photograph taken in the backyard of the house on Elmfield Drive the summer their son Daniel had graduated college. Walter was squinting against the sun. She was laughing at something just outside the frame. Neither of them knew yet what was coming, but that was the thing about photographs: they did not prepare you, they only confirmed. She had not planned to bring the bag to an auction, but there was nowhere to leave it that felt right, and she had learned in the time since the house was sold that holding on to the feeling of somewhere safe to set things down was not the same as having it. The house on Elmfield Drive had been hers and Walter's for 38 years. They had repainted the shutters 3 times, replaced the furnace, twice replanted the side garden after a particularly bad winter, killed everything they had put in the previous spring. It was not a remarkable house to anyone driving past it. To her, it was the accumulated result of every decision they had made together. Every compromise, every ordinary evening that turned out in retrospect to have been one of the good ones. When Walter's illness came, and came was the right word for it, deliberate and unhurried. The way certain things arrive that you cannot turn away. The house became for 3 years less a home and more a geography of loss. This room where he could still walk unaided. This room where he could not. This doorway he had to learn to navigate differently. This chair where she would sit after he was finally asleep and allow herself for exactly as long as it took to drink 1 cup of tea. To be afraid. After he was gone, she had 8 months before Daniel came with the papers. He had not brought them cruelly. She understood that now better than she had then. He stood in the kitchen. The same kitchen where she had taught him to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, where he had told her at 17 that he had wrecked the car where Walter had once danced with her to a song on the radio, because neither of them could remember the name of it, and it had not mattered. And Daniel spread the mortgage statements and the repair estimates and the tax assessments across the table with the careful efficiency of someone who had been sitting with these numbers alone for a long time and had finally decided to share the weight of them. Mom, the numbers don't work anymore. She had looked at the papers and then at her son and understood that the question underneath the numbers, where will you go, what will you need, who will be responsible, had already been calculated. And the calculation had already been made, and she had not been in the room when it happened. She had said, "And where do I go?" He had hesitated. Not long, long enough. "We'll figure something out." She had nodded because there was nothing in his face that made her believe the figuring would happen quickly, and she was not wrong. What followed was a year of thresholds. Her sister's spare room in Harrisburg, which smelled of carpet cleaner and good intentions. A friend's pull-out sofa in Doylestown where the walls were thin, and she could hear every morning the ordinary sounds of a family that was not hers moving through its routines. A narrow room behind the office of Calvary Lutheran Church in Mercer, offered by Pastor Gerald Webb, who was a kind man and who had known Walter and who left a small basket of fruit outside her door on Sundays, which she appreciated without ever mentioning because some kindnesses are most useful when they are received quietly. Each place came with genuine warmth. Each departure came with a particular quality of relief that was not hers and that she had learned to recognize without making anyone feel ashamed of it. She was temporary. This was understood by everyone, including her, and the understanding did not make it smaller. Her daughter-in-law Susan had come to the church room one afternoon in March with a casserole dish and an expression of careful preparation. "Margaret, we just don't have the space long term. You know how it is with the kids." Margaret had smiled the kind of smile that asks nothing and confirms everything. "Of course, I understand completely." She did. That was not the part that hurt. The part that hurt was the word long-term, which implied that she had been asking for it, which she had not. That night, sitting on the narrow bed with the folder of documents in her lap, she found tucked between two of the pages a piece of paper she had forgotten was there. Small, folded, twice the handwriting her father's. He had given it to her when she was 22, the summer she had taken the job in Pittsburgh that everyone thought was too far away. And she had been too young to understand what he meant. Never trust the room everyone wants. Pay attention to the one no one enters. She had kept it for 58 years, the way people keep things they don't yet have the context to use. Sitting in the church room, she read it again and felt something shift, not hope exactly, not yet. Recognition. 2 months later, on a Tuesday morning, with frost on the borrowed car, she drove to the library and printed the Mercer County auction listings. She was not sure what she was looking for. She knew without being able to explain it precisely that she was not looking for what everyone else was looking for, which was value potential return on investment. She was looking for something that had been passed over enough times that it had stopped trying to be what other people needed and had simply become what it was. Lot 47 had been on the county books for 11 years. Before that, it had existed in a category of property so obscure that the county assessor's office had apparently entered it into the system only after a routine audit turned it up a parcel. With no registered improvements, no utility hookups, no recorded owner of current standing, no structure visible from any road. The notation read, "Possible subsurface installation origin, unknown pre-existing survey anomaly." It had been assessed at $40. It had never been taxed because the tax bill had never found an address to which it could be sent. She read this 3 times. Then she folded the paper, put it in her coat pocket, and drove back to the church and sat very still for a long time. She did not tell Daniel. She did not tell her sister or the friend in Doylestown or Pastor Webb. She was not keeping a secret. She was keeping a decision, which is a different thing. And she had learned the difference only after years of watching decisions made on her behalf by people who believed genuinely and without malice that they knew better what she needed than she did. The Mercer County Municipal Building was a low-wide structure from the 1970s. Renovated once in the 1990s and not since, so that it had the particular quality of government buildings that have been partially improved. Some rooms fluorescent and new, others still carrying the original drop ceilings and linoleum that absorbed sound flatly and without sympathy. The auction room was the second kind. Metal folding chairs in rows, a podium at the front, a clerk with reading glasses on a beaded chain, sorting folders with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had seen every variation of human hope and disappointment a county auction could produce. She counted 31 people, developers who attended every auction as professional maintenance, real estate investors with notebooks, a few private individuals who looked uncertain in the specific way of first-timers. She did not sit near the front. She had learned in various rooms over the past year that the back offered a view of everything, and that the people who assume the most always arrange themselves up front. The auction moved quickly through the first lots, a condemned property on the south side of Mercer, a storage unit and the land under it, an abandoned equipment shed, a lot that had been a gas station in the 1980s and still carried the environmental liability that came with it. Each one drawn from the catalogue described in the clerk's careful monotone, bid on and closed with the small ceremony of the gavel. Then the clerk adjusted his reading glasses, turned the page and read, Lot 47, unregistered underground residential structure. Mercer County, Route 9, outskirts, condition unknown, no access verified on record, no utility connections confirmed. Starting bid $5. He paused in the way people pause when they know the sentence they have just spoken will take a moment to land. It landed with laughter, not mean, not loud, just the quick communal release of people confirming with each other that they had heard something absurd correctly. A man near the front. That's not a house, that's a liability. A woman a few rows back, quieter. Someone's idea of a joke. The developer with the notebook did not write anything down. The clerk waited, his pen poised. Do we have any opening bids? Margaret Holloway raised her hand. The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in stages, the laughter dying back as people registered what they were seeing. An 80-year-old woman in a worn coat with clean shoes, her hand raised with the steady certainty of someone who had already thought through every objection. The clerk looked at her over his glasses. Ma'am, just to confirm, you're bidding $5 on an underground structure with no verified condition, no confirmed access, and no utility connections on record. Yes. A man 3 rows ahead turned in his chair, taking her in with the expression of someone deciding in real time whether to be amused or concerned. You sure about that, ma'am? At your age might be hard to get back out. She looked at him evenly, without anger, without apology, with the clarity of a woman who had spent 3 years being handed other people's assessments of what she was capable of and had grown very precise in her handling of them. I'm not planning on leaving. That produced a different kind of reaction, somewhere between a laugh and something less comfortable. The clerk cleared his throat. Do we have any other bids? No one moved. Sold, he said, and the gavel came down once clean and final for $5. She made her way to the front. While the room was already moving on to the next lot, the air resettling around Lot 47, as though it had never existed. The clerk handed her a thin folder, yellowed corners soft with handling the kind of paperwork that had been filed and refiled and passed over so many times it had absorbed the quality of everything that had been declined. For what it's worth, he said quietly, that parcel hasn't had a recorded owner in over 40 years. She took the folder with both hands, opened it briefly. Property descriptions, survey coordinates. The chain of custody for a piece of land that appeared to have simply stopped belonging to anyone the same year she and Walter moved into the house on Elmfield Drive. And there at the bottom of the last page, in a margin where no official notation had any business being, a line of handwriting so faded it was barely there. Pencil on yellowed paper, but legible if you held it to the light, and were the kind of person who did not give up easily on difficult things. For whoever stays. She closed the folder. Outside, the air was colder and cleaner than the building had been. She stood for a moment on the steps without moving, holding the folder against her coat. The man who had made the comment about her age was coming out behind her, already on his phone, already somewhere else. He didn't look at her. She had not expected him to. She drove. The coordinates led to a stretch of Route 9, where the road curved away from a stand of oaks and a field open to the right, bordered by a collapsed wooden fence that had not been maintained in decades. The field was unremarkable wild grass in varying heights. The ground uneven, the kind of terrain that had once had a purpose and had since been released from it. No driveway, no signage, no marker of any kind. She pulled onto the gravel shoulder, turned off the engine, and sat looking at the field for a moment. A hawk moved across the upper part of her windshield and disappeared. She thought maybe this was a mistake. She had had this thought before about other things, and had been right about some of them and wrong about others. And she had learned that the thought itself was not useful information. Action was the only way to find out. She got out of the car. The grass came up past her ankles in places, and the ground had the slight give of earth that had not been compacted by foot traffic in a long time. She walked slowly and with attention, the folder tucked under her arm, scanning the ground with the methodical patience of a woman who had learned that overlooking things rarely served her. She found it 50 feet from the fence line, a rectangle of corroded metal roughly 3 feet by 4 set flush with the ground and half buried under grass and old leaf matter, with 2 recessed handles on one end, barely visible under the oxidation but unmistakably handles, which meant it was a door, which meant it opened, which meant something was below. Welded to the right side of the frame, a small metal box. She pried it open. Inside, a folded piece of paper sealed in a plastic sleeve and a small key on a wire loop labeled in printed block letters, generator. She unfolded the paper. A business card tucked inside Aldrich Maintenance LLC, Mercer County, Pennsylvania, established 1974. Below the card, a handwritten note in the same careful block printing. Annual maintenance performed through November 2019. All primary systems operational as of last inspection. If you are reading this, the timer on the backup lighting runs 48 hours from manual activation. Generator fuel left storage cabinet yellow cans. She read it twice. Someone had maintained this place. Regularly. Deliberately. For decades and until recently, and whoever they were, they had left instructions for the person who came next. But there was something else, something she had almost missed. Tucked beneath the maintenance note, a second folded paper, smaller, different handwriting, more recent ink. It read, "If you are the one who purchased this property through the county auction, the folder you were given contains an envelope taped to the inside back cover. It has been placed there by arrangement with the county clerk's office, held in a sealed administrative file since 2019 per the instructions of Robert Aldrich, to be attached to any future auction documentation for this parcel. Do not lose it. It belongs to you now." She stood very still in the field. Then she opened the auction folder and turned to the inside back cover. There, exactly as described, a small envelope taped with brittle yellow tape, labeled in the same block printing for the lock. She peeled it free carefully and put it in her coat pocket without opening it. The question of what lock it fit would answer itself when the time came. Robert Aldrich had been thorough. He had understood that he would not be there when the right person arrived, and he had made the necessary arrangements so that his absence would not become an obstacle. She put the note back in its sleeve, tucked the generator key into her coat pocket alongside Walter's pen, and turned her attention to the hatch. It resisted. Not locked, but sealed by decades of temperature change, working on the metal around the frame. She pulled. Once got nothing. Pulled again with both hands, feet braced against the ground, and felt something give, not the hatch itself, but the seal, a slow release, and then the whole thing shifted, and she pulled harder, and the hatch swung open, with a sound that was less a creak than a held breath finally released. Air came up from below, not cold, not stale, not the mineral damp of a neglected basement. Just still, like a room that had been waiting with the windows closed. A staircase descended into shadow. Concrete steps, each one precise, a metal railing bolted into the right wall. She activated the flashlight on her phone and pointed it down. The steps went about 12 feet before reaching a floor. The walls were poured concrete, unfinished, built to last and not to impress. No debris on the steps, no water damage on the walls. She looked for the things that would tell her whether this was safe, and found them: structurally intact stairs, a secure railing, air moving slightly against her face. That meant ventilation was still functioning. She went down. The temperature dropped 4 or 5 degrees as she descended. But it leveled out, not the deepening cold of an uninsulated space, but the stable cool of a place where the ground itself was providing regulation. At the bottom, she swept the flashlight around. and began to understand what she was standing in. A corridor, narrow but not cramped, extended ahead, approximately 30 feet before turning right. Along the right side, exposed conduit and wiring cloth-wrapped cable from the 1970s junction boxes with toggle switches, all dated but intact. She found the first light switch 6 feet in through it, nothing for a moment. Then a low hum and fluorescent panels along the ceiling brightened, flickered twice, and steadied. The first room on her left was a kitchen metal countertops, a stainless sink with a hand pump, wall cabinets with oxidized pulls, a thin layer of fine dust on every surface, but not the deep accumulation of true abandonment. She ran 2 fingers across the nearest counter. A clean line appeared. Beneath the dust, the surface was intact. No corrosion, no organic growth. The room on her right was storage shelves floor to ceiling, organized with care. Canned goods in rows by category, their labels faded but legible. Dates stamped on lids. A box of tools on the lowest shelf, the tools clean, the box closed. She moved to the end of the corridor. The turn led to a shorter hallway, and at the end of it was the thing that stopped her completely. A door. Wood, dark-stained, smooth-grained, entirely at odds with everything around it. The concrete walls, the metal fixtures, the functional austerity of the space it inhabited. It did not belong here in the way that tells you immediately it was placed here on purpose, by someone who understood that the difference between a shelter and a home was not structural but intentional. She pressed her palm flat against the surface. The wood was warmer than the surrounding air, noticeably enough that she pulled her hand back and pressed it again to confirm. A thin frame of flexible thermal cable ran along the inside of the door frame, the type used in historic wood preservation, designed to maintain consistent temperature and protect the grain from moisture damage. It had been wired into the main circuit, running as long as the generator. Someone had loved this door enough to protect it from the cold. She reached into her coat for the small brass key from the auction, lifted it and inserted it into the lock centered in the door's brass plate. It fit the way a key fits a lock. It was made for with the clean seating of 2 things that belong together. And when she turned it, the mechanism engaged with a single precise click that was more feeling than sound. She turned the handle, pushed. The door opened on silence, swinging on maintained hinges, and light came through the gap before she could take a step forward. Not fluorescent utility light, but something warmer. Amber, the quality of light in late afternoon when it comes through west-facing windows. She stepped through. The room was larger than the footprint above suggested, which meant the excavation had extended beyond the visible surface, dug with intention and precision, and a particular kind of long-term thinking. The floor was hardwood finished smooth, carrying the patina of age, but not damage. Recessed lights in the ceiling, emitting that warm amber tone connected to the main electrical system, steady and unhurried. Along the far wall, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled not decoratively arranged, but actually filled spines. Visible books pulled and replaced at different depths, a few lying on their sides, on top of standing rows. A sofa against the left wall, its cushions wrapped in sealed protective fabric, the kind of covering applied by someone who intended to come back and wanted to find things as they had left them. A low table centered on a woven rug, the rug's colors muted but present. A kitchen to the right, complete, with a range and a refrigerator and utensils hung on a rack above the counter, in the intuitive arrangement of a person who cooked regularly and had thought about where things should live. A hallway beyond that, a door slightly open, she could see the edge of a made bed, the corner of a nightstand. She did not move quickly. She stood just inside the door and let the room come to her the way she had learned to stand in new spaces and simply receive them before trying to interpret them. No decay, no water damage, no signs of infestation or the structural compromise that came from neglect. The air was dry and stable. The temperature inside this room was noticeably warmer than the corridor, the generator system maintaining something close to comfort. There was a tightness in her throat that she did not try to name right away. She moved forward, her hand trailing along the back of the sofa, then to the shelf where she pulled a book free and opened it. The pages were intact, faintly yellowed at the edges but not brittle. In the margins, handwriting, small, careful, the kind of annotation made by a person reading for something specific, looking for something they needed to confirm. She put it back. On the wall beside the shelves, a photograph in a simple frame. Two people, a man and a woman, standing outside in summer light in front of a house she did not recognize. The man's hand was on the woman's shoulder. The woman was not looking at the camera. She was looking at something just past it. Her expression carrying the quality of someone watching something they love and knowing in some part of themselves they haven't fully acknowledged that it is temporary. On the table at the center of the room, a single item, an envelope. Cream-colored thick paper, sealed. No name on the front. She approached it without hurrying, stood over it, then picked it up. The weight of it was specific, not just paper, but the weight of something that had been thought about carefully before being put down. She broke the seal with her thumb and withdrew a single folded sheet. The handwriting was steady, deliberate in the way of someone who wrote by hand because they understood that the physical act of writing was itself a kind of commitment. She read the first line and stood very still. To the woman they underestimated. She read it again. The tightness in her throat moved into her chest and settled there, not painfully, but with the specific pressure of something that had been true for a long time and had just been named out loud for the first time. She read on. Each sentence was precise, unhurried. If you are standing here, it means you chose what no one else would. It means you stayed where others turn away. And it means you understand the value of a place that doesn't ask you to leave. She lowered the letter for a moment and looked around the room, the warm light, the steady quiet, the particular quality of a space built with intention and maintained with care, and offered finally without conditions. She had not been anywhere in the last 3 years where no one was managing her expectations about how long she could stay. The sensation of being in a place that was simply present, simply there, without the ambient pressure of her temporary status. It was disorienting in the way that the cessation of pain is disorienting. She had not noticed how accustomed she had become to the weight of it. She was still holding the letter when she noticed what she had not noticed before. One of the panels behind the bottom row of books did not sit flush with the wall. A gap thin as a finger's width running along the left edge. Not an accident of construction. An invitation if you were the kind of person who looked for what didn't fit. She crossed to it, pressed. Nothing. Pressed again with more intention, felt the resistance of a magnetic catch. And then a soft click and the panel shifted inward and to the side. Behind it, a space approximately 18 inches deep and 3 feet wide, running the full height of the lower bookshelf. Inside, 2 things. First, a bundle of letters, envelopes of different ages, different papers bound with a ribbon, whose original blue had faded to something closer to gray. Second, set carefully apart from the letters, the metal case she now recognized from the description in Robert Aldrich's note, rectangular 6 inches by 9, with a small lock on the front. She reached for the letters first, untied the ribbon slowly, the way you handle something that belongs to someone else, even if they are gone, even if you have been in some way you can't yet explain, expected. The first letter was addressed to Lillian. She hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting was a man's, not the same hand as the letter on the table, but related earlier, the cursive slightly less controlled. My love. The date at the top was 1974. I built this place so you would always have somewhere the world could not take from you. Even when it forgets you, even when it decides you've had enough, this will be here. The foundation goes down 14 feet. The walls are 6 inches of poured concrete with rebar at 12-inch intervals. I tested every system 3 times. I am telling you this because I know you will want to know it was done right. It was. Come when you need to. I will make sure it is always ready. She folded the letter and sat down on the floor with her back against the bookshelf. The bundle in her lap, the warm light above her, the hum of the generator barely audible through the walls. She had not sat on a floor in a very long time. Not because she couldn't, because there had not been a floor that felt like it would hold her. She read one letter after another. Each one told the same story in different ways. A man named Thomas Aldrich, who had built this place after his wife Lillian was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 1971, and the courts operating under the laws of that era had stripped her of the right to hold property in her own name. He had built a place outside the system's reach because the system had failed her, and he had maintained it year after year as an act of faith that she would eventually arrive. She never did. The letters did not explain why. They only recorded the continuing fact of his preparation, the annual updates to the systems, the books added to the shelves. The door refinished every few years because Lillian had loved dark wood, and he saw no reason to stop honoring that. She reached the bottom of the bundle. One envelope remained unmarked, heavier, the paper more formal. She opened it. A single page, no greeting, no name. If you're reading this, then she never came back. Or she did and chose to leave. Either way, this place is yours now. Not because you were given it, but because you understood it. And if the world comes looking for it. Remember, what mattered here was never meant to be sold. She set the page down carefully on the floor beside her. Outside, very faintly, she heard the sound of a car on the gravel shoulder of Route 9. Then another. She sat with the stillness for one more moment, letting the sound register, letting it mean what it meant. She had been in enough situations in the last 3 years to know when someone had arrived who had not been invited, and to know that the gap between owning something and being allowed to keep it was not always as simple as a bill of sale and a gavel and $5 changing hands. She stood, folded the last letter and put it in her coat pocket, picked up the metal case and held it in both hands, noting its weight, noting the lock. Then she put it in her bag alongside the bundle of letters and went to meet whatever was coming. She came up through the hatch into the kind of afternoon that does not apologize for itself. The sky had gone flat and white, the October sun somewhere behind it, and the cold had settled more completely into the field than it had been when she went down. 2 vehicles. A black SUV parked on the gravel shoulder just behind her borrowed car, and a second one pulling in behind it, its tires crunching over the same gravel, stopping with the precision of a vehicle whose driver wanted to be noticed without appearing to try. 2 men in dark coats moved across the field toward her, with the unhurried confidence of people who had arrived at a place they had already decided belonged to them in some meaningful way. The taller one reached her first. His name was Gordon Vance, Crest Valley Development Group, delivered in the smooth, sequential way of someone whose introduction had become an assertion. Silver at the temples, mid-50s. The kind of man who had spent enough time in rooms where decisions were made that he had absorbed the room's authority into his bearing. The second man was Ray Sutter. Positioned slightly behind Vance, his function reinforcement rather than persuasion, watching her with the flat, evaluating attention of someone who had already formed his opinion and was only confirming it. Vance smiled with his whole face, or at least with all the parts that could be controlled. "Mrs. Holloway, we were hoping we'd catch you." She did not answer immediately. She took the time to close the hatch, pulling it down with both hands until the seal engaged, and then she straightened and looked at him. She had not asked how he knew her name because she already understood that he knew it the same way he knew to be at this field on this afternoon, which meant someone had been watching the auction or watching the listing before the auction, or both. "I don't remember sending an invitation," she said. Vance absorbed that without losing the smile. He opened the folder he was carrying. Clean, organized, the kind of presentation prepared for a first meeting with someone you expected to convert quickly, and turned it so she could see the figures on the first page. The number was large enough to end most conversations before they became arguments. He described the company, its projects in the region, its track record of responsible land development. He used the word acquired with a faint extra weight, as though he wanted her to hear the gap between acquiring something and actually possessing it. She looked at the number for exactly as long as it took to confirm she had read it correctly. Then she looked back at him. "No." Sutter stepped in, dropping the courtesy Vance had maintained. Mrs. Holloway, let's be straight. You bought a parcel with no utilities, no road access, no structural certification, and no recorded history of habitation for $5 this morning. That's not an investment. That's a liability. And at your age, the county is going to have questions about whether independent occupancy of an unregistered subterranean structure is something they can allow. She let him finish. Then, "You're not here for the house." She looked from Sutter to Vance and back. "You're here for what's under it." Neither of them smiled. That confirmed it more completely than any answer they could have given. Vance recovered first. He told her the offer had a short window, that she should take the night and consider it. She told him she had already considered it. He suggested she reconsider. She told him the conversation was finished for today and asked them to leave. They left, but not before Vance turned back once and said the words that occupied the exact space between a threat and a promise. "We'll be in touch, Mrs. Holloway. This conversation isn't over." She stood in the field after their cars had gone and looked at the hatch beneath her feet and then at the road. He was not wrong that the county would ask questions. He was only wrong about whose side the questions would be on. She drove back to the church and sat at the small desk with the metal case in front of her and the folder of property documents open beside it. And she went through everything she had brought up from below. The case was still locked. She put it aside and focused on what she could read. The trust had been established on March 14, 1974. The grantor was Thomas E. Aldrich. The beneficiary was Lillian M. Aldrich. The terms were stated in the careful legal language of the era. The property, described by survey coordinates matching the parcel she now owned, was held in perpetual protection for the benefit of the named beneficiary. And in the event of the beneficiary's death or permanent incapacity, the trust passed to any subsequent owner of record who met a single condition. The condition was this: the property must not be sold, transferred, or encumbered within 30 days of acquisition. She read that clause 4 times. The land described in the 1974 survey coordinates extended considerably beyond the surface parcel she had purchased. The original survey ran to 47 acres. The current county records showed 6. The difference had been removed from the recorded parcel at some point between the trust's establishment and the present, replaced in the county's system with a revised survey bearing a filing date of November 1989. 41 acres had simply ceased to exist on paper, absorbed into adjacent parcels. She thought about what might have happened in November 1989 that would have made someone want to redraw a land survey, and she did not have to think for long. Crest Valley Development Group had been incorporated in Pennsylvania in 1987. She slept 4 hours. It was enough. It had always been enough. Daniel arrived the next afternoon. She heard the unfamiliar car on the church's side street and recognized the particular quality of a pause before a knock that belonged to someone stealing themselves. He looked thinner than the last time she had seen him. He stood in the small room and looked at the material spread across the desk, and his expression moved through several things before settling on the one that was hardest for him to say. "They called me," he said. "Crest Valley, 2 days ago." He looked at the floor, then back at her. "They said you might have gotten yourself into something over your head. I thought—" He stopped. "You thought I needed help." No accusation in her voice. Only the fact of it, which explained the timing of his arrival too precisely to be anything other than what it was. He sat on the edge of the narrow bed and put his hands on his knees. She asked if he had known Crest Valley called him first. He held her gaze for a moment, then, "Yes." Just the one word, and the weight of it was not in what it admitted, but in what it closed off the possibility that this had been anything other than a coordinated approach. She did not say what she could have said. She said, "Then sit down properly. I need you to understand what you almost helped them take." She walked him through the documents in order. The trust, the original survey, the 1989 revision, the gap between what existed in the ground and what existed on paper. He listened with the focused discomfort of a person hearing a story that implicates them and cannot look away. When she showed him the acreage differential and explained the 1987 incorporation date, he was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up the survey and held it close to read the coordinates. This boundary, his finger tracing the original perimeter line. This corner, that's the northeast edge of the Crest Valley commercial project on Route 9. The one they broke ground on last spring. He looked up. If this survey is valid, they've been building on land that isn't theirs to build on. They don't want to buy the property, she said. They need me to sign it over. Without my signature on a transfer document, their title is incomplete and their project is built on contested ground. He set the survey down carefully. They've been looking for this place. Not since you bought it, before. The full shape of it becoming visible all at once. They filed the zoning dispute this morning, didn't they? She handed him the notice that had been slid under the church door during the night. He read it. His jaw tightened. I need a lawyer, she said. Someone who knows land trust law and county filing procedures and isn't afraid of a company that has been operating in this county for 35 years. She paused. Do you remember Clara Bennett? Clara Bennett had retired from real estate law in Mercer County 3 years ago after a career that had included several successful challenges to municipal survey revisions used to absorb private land into development corridors. She was 67, had known Walter slightly from the Rotary, and had come to the memorial service and shaken Margaret's hand with both of hers and said nothing, which was the right thing to say. Daniel said he would call her. He did. Clara arrived at the church the following morning with her own folder thicker than Maggie's, because she had spent the intervening evening pulling records and cross-referencing filing dates and building the architecture of a legal position from documents that other people had assumed no one would ever look at together. She sat across from Maggie and spread her materials alongside Maggie's and did not say anything for a while, which was how she processed. Then she looked up. The zoning dispute is a delay tactic, Clara said, her voice carrying the flat certainty of someone who had seen the same tactic deployed in different configurations for 40 years. It's not strong enough to hold in front of a county board if we show up with what you have. But the 30-day clock is the real target. If they can keep this in procedural limbo until day 31, the trust protection clause expires and the property is exposed. She tapped the trust document. They know about this clause. They have to. Which means someone in their organization has seen these documents, which means they had access to information about this parcel that was not publicly recorded. That's a different problem for them. Maggie asked. Can we prove the 1989 survey revision was fraudulent? Clara pulled a single page from her folder, a record from the Mercer County Recorder of Deeds database. The revision was filed by a company called Terrace Land Services, LLC. Terrace Land Services was dissolved in 1992. Its sole registered agent from incorporation to dissolution was a man named Philip Corwin. She slid another page across. Philip Corwin joined Crest Valley Development Group as Director of Site Acquisition in 1993. The room was quiet. Then Maggie said, How long did it take you to find that? Clara almost smiled. 3 hours, which means a competent attorney on their side already knows we can find it, which means they're counting on us not having time to use it before the 30 days run out. We need to get in front of the county board before the end of this week. Daniel came back in from the hallway and said, Crest Valley had retained outside counsel from Pittsburgh, a firm with a regional reputation for extended procedural challenges, the kind of legal strategy designed not to win arguments but to exhaust opponents. He said it with the clipped economy of someone delivering bad news they want to get through quickly. Maggie looked at the documents, then at Clara, then at her son. We have 11 days before the 30-day window closes. What do we do today? What they did was request an emergency hearing before the Mercer County Board of Supervisors on the basis that the zoning dispute had been filed under a fraudulent premise. Clara filed the request by noon. A county employee named Kevin Marsh, who had served the zoning notice and had stayed long enough to say what he stayed to say, confirmed to Clara in a phone call that the filing timestamp on the zoning dispute predated the auction by 72 hours and that he had flagged this internally on the morning of the auction and that his flag had been closed without response. Kevin Marsh had been with the county recorder's office for 9 years. He had seen filings manipulated before, had documented 2 of them, and had both times been told the discrepancies were clerical. He agreed to provide a written statement because he had been waiting without allowing himself to use that word for a case where the other side had someone willing to stand behind the documentation. That night, she opened the metal case. She fitted the small key from the folder's back cover to the lock and turned it. Inside documents. Not letters, not personal correspondence. Records. Official stamped, notarized. The original deed of title to all 47 acres filed in 1974 with the full survey coordinates. The incorporation papers for the Aldrich Family Preservation Trust. A series of annual maintenance logs signed by Roberta Aldrich from 1975 through 2019, each one confirming that the structure was operational and the primary systems had been tested and found functional. And beneath all of these, a single folded map hand-drawn ink on heavy paper, the kind of drafting that preceded computers, showing the property boundaries of the original 47 acres in precise detail. With notations in Thomas Aldrich's handwriting marking specific features, and along the northeast boundary a note that read, "This line is not where they will say it is. Keep this map. It was made before they changed it." He had known. Thomas Aldrich had known at some point before November 1989 that someone was going to change the survey. He had made a map before they could. He had locked it in a case and left it in a room behind a door that could only be opened by a key distributed through channels no one had thought to monitor. The county auctioned the last and least observed point of entry. She had not stumbled into a situation. She had been in some way that transcended the practical, arrived at the end point of a chain of intention that had begun 50 years ago with a man who understood what it cost to have somewhere taken from you and had spent years building a proof against it. She put everything back in the case, closed it, sat in the dark for a moment, not because she was afraid of tomorrow, but because she had learned over a long life of hard transitions that the moment before a thing changes is worth sitting in fully, because you will not pass through it again. Then she went to sleep. The Mercer County Board of Supervisors met in a room that had been designed for administrative efficiency and had achieved over the decades a kind of institutional neutrality that belonged to no particular era. Drop-ceiling fluorescent panels, a long table at the front behind which 3 supervisors sat with water glasses and folders, and the careful expressions of people who had agreed to hear something they had not yet decided what to do with. The gallery held perhaps 40 people more than county hearings typically drew. Clara Bennett sat beside Maggie at the respondents' table with the metal case between them and her files arranged in the specific order she had determined the night before. Crest Valley's legal team occupied the table to the left. 3 attorneys from the Pittsburgh firm organized and expensively suited their materials, stacked with the geometric precision of a team prepared for a longer proceeding than this and willing to signal as much. Gordon Vance sat behind them in the gallery's first row, watching the front of the room with the patience of a man who had learned that county boards responded to professional confidence the way weather responds to pressure systems predictably if you understood the mechanics. Daniel was 4 rows back on the aisle. The board chair, Gerald Purcell, opened the proceeding with flat procedural efficiency. He summarized the dispute. Crest Valley's lead attorney, Hargrove, presented first. His argument was structured and clean. The property had no verified registration, no utility connections of record, no structural inspection on file. The acquiring party was an elderly individual without legal representation at the time of purchase, this said, with practiced sympathy. He referenced the county's duty of care regarding habitable structures and outlined the regulatory framework that would require an independent structural assessment before any occupancy could be certified. A well-built argument designed not to win outright but to generate delay. When Hargrove sat down, Purcell looked at Clara. She stood. She began with Kevin Marsh's statement printed and placed before each supervisor in turn. The zoning challenge had been filed 72 hours before the auction. At the time of filing, the property had no registered owner of current standing. Crest Valley had therefore filed a challenge against a property with no owner against whom a challenge could be directed. Either the filing was premature and procedurally invalid, or it had been made with foreknowledge of a specific buyer, which raised questions about the company's access to pre-auction information that the county might find worth examining. She set the original 1974 survey on the table. Then she set the 1989 revision beside it. The two documents were different sizes, the original hand-drafted on large format drafting paper. The revision a standard county filing form, and the visual difference was immediately apparent. She walked the board through the coordinates, pointing to the northeast boundary line on each document, and the distance between them 41 acres removed from the recorded parcel in November 1989 by a filing from Terrace Land Services LLC. She set Philip Cohen's name before the board twice, once as the registered agent of Terrace Land Services at dissolution, once as director of site acquisition at Crest Valley from 1993 onward. She did not say the word fraud. She arranged the facts in their correct sequence and allowed the board to read the sequence for themselves, which was more durable than any word she could have chosen. The third supervisor, a woman named Patricia Hale, who had said nothing, and had the specific stillness of someone thinking rather than waiting, looked up from the documents. Ms. Bennett, are you asserting that the 1989 survey revision was filed with the intention of obscuring the parcel's true boundaries in anticipation of future development? Clara's answer was precise. I'm asserting that the documents speak to that possibility in ways that warrant investigation. What I'm asking this board to determine today is narrower whether the zoning challenge filed by Crest Valley was procedurally valid given its pre-auction timestamp, and whether the historical record of this property, including a trust document establishing protected status dating to 1974, should be entered into the county's current record. Purcell looked at Hargrove. Counselor, the timestamp question. Hargrove deployed the phrase administrative timing with the confidence of someone who had used it before. He described standard pre-filing procedures, lead times, clerical processes. His voice did not change. He was very good at what he did, which was to describe implausible things as though their implausibility were a function of the listener's limited familiarity with procedure. Patricia Hale set down her water glass. The filing identifies the property owner as unknown at the time of submission. If your client had no knowledge of a specific acquiring party before the auction, why file at all? What triggered the challenge? The room shifted, not loudly. The way rooms shift when a question lands where the argument wasn't armored. Hargrove answered with a reference to the company's standard monitoring of county auction listings and their interest in the Route 9 corridor. It was a reasonable answer. It was also, and everyone in the room felt this, an answer that raised more questions than it resolved. Purcell called a 15-minute recess. In the hallway, Vance approached her. Not with the folder, not with the orchestrated warmth of their first meeting in the field. He stood in front of her with his hands in his coat pockets, and his expression carrying something she had not seen there before, the specific quality of a man who had recalculated and not liked the result. Daniel stood 6 feet away. There's still a path here that doesn't involve months of county proceedings, Vance said, his voice lower now. The professional calibration scaled back. You've proven your point. The board is sympathetic. But sympathetic and decisive are different things, and this can still go sideways in ways that won't serve you. Take the offer. Let the attorneys close it today. She looked at him with the patient clarity of a woman who had listened to a particular kind of argument for 3 years and had developed an immunity to its most persuasive forms. Mr. Vance, I've spent the last 3 years being told what I need by people who had already decided what to do with the answer. My son told me what I needed, and he meant it kindly. My bank told me what I could sustain. My doctor told me what I could manage. Each of them was making a calculation about time, how much I had, what it was worth, what I should trade it for. She paused, and when she continued, her voice did not rise, but it carried into the hallway in the way that certain things carry not through volume, but through weight. You don't get to be one more person who decides that for me. Vance left without responding. The board reconvened. Purcell read a summary statement into the record covering the timestamp issue, the Corwin connection, and the trust documentation, and concluded that the zoning challenge as filed was procedurally insufficient and would be suspended pending a formal investigation by the County Recorder's Office into the 1989 survey revision. The property would remain in the possession of its current owner of record. The 30-day trust protection window would be unaffected by the suspended challenge. Crest Valley Development Group would be notified that their Route 9 project site was under a title review that might affect approximately 41 acres of their current footprint. Hargrove was on his phone before Purcell finished the last sentence. Clara closed her folder with the economy of someone who had never doubted their outcome, but had respected the process enough to treat it as though the outcome mattered. The title review will take 6 to 18 months, she said quietly. They'll settle before it concludes. A pause. They always settle before it concludes. Daniel drove her back along Route 9. The afternoon had gone pale, and the trees held the last of their leaves against a wind that had finally decided to mean it. He drove with slightly more attention to the mechanics of the task than the task required. I called them back, he said, eyes on the road. Crest Valley, after you told me about the offer. I told them no. A beat. I told them we were going to the hearing and that whatever came out of it, I was behind you. She had known this was coming, not because she was certain of him, but because she had watched him in the gallery during the hearing, had watched the specific progression of his face as Clara laid out the documents, as Hale asked a question, as Vance retreated. There was a moment somewhere during Clara's presentation when the defensiveness Daniel had been wearing since he arrived in her church room had simply stopped being available to him, replaced by something raw and more accurate. I know, she said. He glanced at her briefly. How? Because you showed up, not when they called you. After. He was quiet for several miles. Then, I told myself when we sold the house that it was the practical choice. That's the word I kept using. Practical. He exhaled slowly. I've been using that word as a substitute for a conversation I was afraid to have. She did not fill the silence that followed. I don't know how to fix it, he said finally. The last year and a half, I don't know what that looks like. She turned toward the window. It looks like what you did today, she said. And then again tomorrow. That's all fixing ever looks like. He nodded once, the gesture of a man accepting terms he understood were fair. She did not return to the church that night. She returned to the field. The hatch opened easily now, familiar in the way things become familiar quickly when they matter. She descended with her bag, and the folder moved through the outer corridor and through the wooden door and into the room that she had decided somewhere between the county hearing and the drive back on Route 9 was no longer a place she was visiting. She unpacked her bag, set Walter's watch on the nightstand, hung her coat on the hook inside the bedroom door, put her father's note on the table in the main room, unfolded, weighted down by the metal case so that she could read it whenever she sat down. Then she stood in the center of the room and looked at it. Really looked at it, the way you look at something when the looking is itself an act of decision. The bookshelves and their annotated margins, the warm amber light, the rug whose muted colors she had been learning the longer she spent time with them, the kitchen built for use not display, the photograph on the wall which she had moved closer to examine and which showed Thomas and Lillian Aldrich standing outside a house she now believed, based on the street number, visible on the porch post, to be the original Aldrich property in Mercer, the house above the ground, the one that had been taken before this was built to replace it. She was not sentimental about the space. She was accurate about it. It was not grand. It was not comfortable in the way of places designed for comfort as a primary feature. It was built with the specific intelligence of someone who had thought hard about what a person actually needed in order to exist with dignity, and had provided those things without excess and without omission. She had lived in larger spaces that had made her feel smaller, and she understood now what the difference was. It was not the size of the room. It was whether the room had been built with her in mind. 3 weeks after the hearing, Ruth Callahan arrived. She came through Clara Bennett, whose professional network stretched through 30 years of Mercer County real estate, and who knew as a consequence most of the situations that most of the people in the county found themselves in. Ruth was 74, a retired school teacher from the western side of Mercer, whose house had been sold 18 months ago by her son and daughter-in-law after her husband's death with her agreement. Because the agreement had been presented as the only option, and she had been too recently bereaved to interrogate that premise. She had been living in a room in her daughter's house, careful and invisible in the way of a woman who understood that her presence was a generosity being extended and had shaped herself accordingly. Clara mentioned her to Maggie without framing it as a request. Maggie called Ruth the following day. They talked for 40 minutes. And in the conversation, Maggie recognized in Ruth's particular combination of self-sufficiency and careful apology a grammar she knew from the inside. Ruth moved in 10 days later into the second bedroom Thomas Aldrich had built. She brought a single trunk and a crate of books, and she arranged them without asking for permission, which was how Maggie knew immediately that she would be all right here. Carol came 6 days after that. She was 68, and Maggie had noticed her in the parking lot of the county building on the day of the hearing, had noticed her. The way Maggie noticed certain things, not because they announced themselves, but because they had a quality of quiet endurance that drew the eye of anyone who had worn the same quality themselves. Carol had been living in her car for 11 weeks, not because she was without resources, but because every resource she had access to came with a condition: she could not meet a credit check, a co-signer, a reference from an employer she no longer had. She had a college degree and a practical competence that expressed itself in the way she handled every physical task as though she had been doing it longer than she'd had to. Maggie did not explain the rules because there were none, which was itself the rule. This space did not require anything of the people in it, except that they did not require anything of each other that they had not freely offered. It was what Thomas Aldrich had been trying to build all along. Not a structure, but a condition. The condition of existing without asking permission. He had built it for one woman who had not been able to reach it, and in his inability to let that be the end of the story, he had built it for every woman who came after her. Daniel came on a Saturday in early December, the first Saturday after the title review had formally begun, and the Crest Valley project site had been flagged with a county notice that would hold for the duration. He brought coffee in a cardboard carrier, 4 cups, which meant he had known there would be 4 people, and had planned for them, which was a small thing, and was not small at all. He sat in the kitchen with Maggie and Ruth and Carol and drank his coffee, and asked Ruth about her year's teaching, and asked Carol about her plans, and answered questions about himself, with the unguarded honesty of a man who had recently been relieved of a pretense he had been maintaining for too long. He was not performing ease. He was finding it carefully in real time, the way you find your footing on unfamiliar ground, by putting weight on it incrementally and adjusting. When Ruth and Carol had moved to the main room with their books, he stayed at the kitchen table with his hands around a second cup. "I keep thinking about what you said about the practical choice," he told her. "I think I was afraid that if I admitted what I actually did, I'd have to admit what I actually felt, which was that I had already decided you were at the end of something instead of the middle of it." She let the words sit before responding, because they deserved that. You made a decision about me that I hadn't made about myself, she said. That's the part that hurt, not the house, the assumption inside the decision. She looked at him without reproach. She was past reproach, had moved through it and come out on the other side into something more useful, which was clarity. But you're here now, and you came back on the right side of it. Those things matter. He nodded, and the nod carried something she recognized from Walter. The ability to receive a truth without either deflecting it or collapsing under it. She had not expected to see it in Daniel, and its appearance moved something in her chest that she did not try to name precisely. That evening, after he had gone after Ruth had fallen asleep in the main room with her book open on her chest, and Carol had settled in for the night, Maggie went to the library and sat with the last of Thomas Aldrich's letters. She had been holding it back without quite knowing why, held back by some instinct that knew she was not yet ready for it. She opened it now. The date at the top was 1982. The handwriting was different from the earlier letters, not deteriorated, but changed the way handwriting changes when the person writing has been altered by what they have been through. She read past the lines she already knew to what she had not yet reached. I spent a long time believing that building this place was about her, that the whole of it, the foundation, the walls, the door I chose because she loved dark wood, the books I put on the shelves because I knew what she needed to read was for her specifically and would be meaningless without her. I was wrong about that, not about loving her, about the rest of it. The place exists because the need exists. The need existed before her and it exists after. And if someone comes who understands that need from the inside, who has felt what it is to be told they have reached the end of their welcome, then this was always for them. Not because they are a substitute, because they are the reason. She folded the letter, set it on the library table beside the others in order as she had placed them all. The room was very quiet. The amber light above the bookshelves had the quality of something settled, something that had decided what it was and was no longer in the process of becoming. She thought about this morning at the auction, the way the room had moved on before the gavel had finished its arc. She thought about the field and the hatch and the particular quality of the air that came up from below, not stale, not rotten, just still as though the place had been holding its breath for the right moment to exhale. She thought about her father's note and what it had taken her 58 years to understand that the room no one enters is not empty. It is simply waiting for someone who will not be deterred by the absence of an invitation. She stood and walked to the main room where Ruth was asleep, and the lamp burned low and the books held their patient places. She turned off the lamp and stood in the dark for a moment. The dark was not empty either. It was the dark of a place that contained people, contained the sound of their breathing, contained the accumulated hours of their having been somewhere and intending to remain. Above her, the field held its stillness under a December sky, the hatch sealed against the cold, the surface of the earth giving nothing away. Below it, the generator ran with a sound so steady and so quiet that you noticed it only when you were listening for it. The mechanical pulse of a place that had been built to outlast every system that had tried to erase it. Margaret Holloway was not waiting to be found anymore. She was not passing through. She was not temporary in the way that had become for 3 long years the central fact of her life. She was where she had chosen to be, in a place that had chosen her back. In a room built by a man who had understood 50 years before she arrived that home was not a thing you were given. It was a thing you stayed for long after everyone else had decided there was no reason to. She went to bed in the room that was hers and slept without difficulty, which was not nothing. It was in fact everything.